2023, and they were down on power. This is currently the scene at the Alpine garage. Sam Collins in the studio with these pictures that Alex on camera here is getting for you. A lot of work going on. Body language seems, I would say, well, not urgent necessarily, but hurried perhaps to get this car back out and get Esteban Ocon clocking up some more laps and a run programme to get through.
Well, it looks to me like one of the drivers, it looks like Ocon has biffed the curb, and that's why the mechanics are working on the underside of the floor, the bit we can't really see quite hard. Nice view of the front suspension, the inboard front suspension on that Alpine, and you can see that they've got a pushrod front suspension layout, that central element, the third element it's sometimes referred to. But for me, the biggest change on this Alpine is something at the moment that we can't really see, and it's to do with the layout of the exhaust pipes. Now, exhaust pipes on a Formula 1 car on the V6 engine are a little bit like tuning an old musical instrument, a sort of bit of brass band work, if you like, just to get the notes right. And what they've done with that exhaust tailpipe and actually the manifold, where all those sort of worm-like bits of spaghetti exhaust feed up to that tailpipe, they found on the old car that they were losing too much power to the MGU-H, the motor generator unit H. That's what recovers the exhaust gas kinetic energy and turns it into battery energy that you can use to make the car go faster down the track, because of course these are all hybrid cars. And they were finding something that Mercedes discovered back in 2014, that if you don't get the exhaust tuning just right, you can't recover enough exhaust energy out of the car and you lose power overall. So that's one of the biggest changes to the Alpine. Just a very neat detail that they've upgraded since the launch there. Look at the leading edge of the side pod duct there with that little drop down. That's something we haven't seen before, Rachel. And Alpine already developing the car. That's fascinating, that actually.
Sam, actually, if you can hang on for a second, I just wanted to ask you something, because Matt Harmon said at the launch that Alpine have pretty much changed everything bar the steering wheel on this car this season. They seem to have gone back to sort of a base level where they have a lot of avenues they can go down with this car development-wise, which it seems to be a running theory throughout several teams on the grid.
It absolutely is, because we've got pretty stable regulations expected into next season. I know it sounds pre-season testing 2024, and I'm talking about 2025 car design here, but this is actually a really crucial time for all of the teams. With a major rule change coming in 2026, you really don't want to get your car concept wrong and have to go and engineer a completely new concept from scratch, because you're going to have to lose a load of time when you really need to be developing a completely different concept of car. Right now, all the teams are banned from developing their 2026 cars, so all the work that goes into these cars needs to carry through to 2025. And some of those comments you refer to, Rachel, that Matt Harmon made me suspect that this team, Alpine, may be plotting to carry at least the chassis and car concept over of this Alpine over into next season, which the team used to do an awful lot when Jolyon was driving for them with the Renault chassis. They kept their chassis for quite a few seasons, I think. One managed to last three different championships.
Great, thank you, Sam. Jolyon, go on. Did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, no, that was not when we had the Lotus chassis of 2015 became pretty much the Renault chassis of 2016, but then it was the year after that. There's a major rule change, so there was no chassis carryover at that point. So it must have been, I guess, before my time at Renault. But Alpine are they're another team that have been pretty downbeat with the launch, with this concept change, and it's clearly a bit of a new direction for them. And both drivers sort of saying, well, you know, let's manage expectations at the start of the year. So they are obviously not particularly happy with the numbers that they've seen in the wind tunnel or at base, and then the CFD data they've got, the simulator driving as well. And this is like for like with what they had last year, so you would hope that there's going to be progression, because of course everyone in the field should be making some good progress with a blank canvas to try and right your wrongs of 2023. But Alpine have started the year thinking we're not where we want to be, but crucially with the concept change, they've given themselves more wriggle room to add performance to the car. So that is the long-term goal, I think, there. And potentially the drivers have got to be a little bit patient to exploit that. And maybe it'll come quickly. Maybe there'll be some more development in the pipeline that can take months, as we saw last year with McLaren.
The patience is a key word, I think, because I got the impression from several teams up and down this grid, maybe even almost half of the teams, saying that, you know they are not going to be competitive at the start of the season, because they have given themselves an opportunity to develop this car in so many different directions, which is maybe something they didn't do last year, which is why a lot of them struggled to try and catch up.
Yeah, it's a common theme, really. A lot of the teams, Sauber's another one that have changed concept, and they're going to be building it up. Actually, Bottas in the car so far has had a decent morning, getting a lot of running in at least. But they are another team that are setting not so lofty expectations with the change of concept, and a lot of that is moving towards the Red Bull design that we saw from last year and the year before, really, where Red Bull have just had iterations of their previous concept, really. And everyone's now moved towards that. They've seen that it's dominated so well last season.
Except Red Bull who got away.
Except Red Bull who got away, and that's the irony of it all. They've all gone towards what was a world beater last year, and Red Bull have thought, well, hang on, you guys all do that, and we're going to try this one. So they're in their own voyage of discovery, really, Red Bull, with their latest design.
It is going to be fascinating, isn't it, to see if this hits this Red Bull. I mean, I remember being here last year and everyone was saying Mercedes might not have side pods. You know, when we were waiting to see it, weren't we? And it was the anticipation of, has somebody come up with a genius idea? And obviously that didn't work, and they put side pods back in the car, essentially. And now we've got this. The moment of possibly that tiny crumb of, or huge crumb of ingenuity from a designer, is the anticipation's fantastic.
It's quite exciting to see in pre-season when you see someone, especially one of the big teams, go off and do something different to everyone else. And I remember the Mercedes, it was 2 years ago now that they had the zero pod unveiled, and you're just looking at it. And this was Mercedes on the back of a dominant run, just missing out in 21, but they were Constructors' champions, and having such a dominant run, and then they unveil this zero pod concept, and you were like, wow, that is alien, but probably incredible. But it wasn't, of course. And that's the thing, when you go out on your own on something innovative, you open yourself up to something that can be tricky. What I would say is the Mercedes, it looked difficult straight away on the circuit in 2022. It looked difficult last year when they tried to, well, they kept with the concept, but they tried to tweak it and maximize it. And watching it out on circuit, watching it on the screens, you could tell that the car looked quite spiky and difficult. It's very early to say on the Red Bull right now, and certainly on the harder tyres earlier on. I mean, probably irrelevant to say because the grip level was just not there. But when Max just bolted on a set of C3s, at least the car's, the base, looked compliant, and that's what we didn't really see from the Mercedes early days. So, needless to say, I think there's probably more encouragement for Red Bull at this stage than the jeopardy that Mercedes had, but you never know.
I think Max said it's not a conservative car. They've been quite bold and quite aggressive, which is what we want to see, isn't it? I mean, we're coming into these last 2 years of regulations where other teams tend to catch up anyway, and it gets a lot tighter towards the end of it, but you always want to see people being bold with the design.
You know what the biggest surprise for me is? That you want to see people being bold. It's quite fun at pre-season testing when the cars look the same. We want to see a tight field, so maybe if they all look the same, they go the same, and that'll be a really close field, and that's quite fun through the season. But when someone doesn't, it does make testing more interesting to see if something is a hit or a miss. What you don't expect is the team that has dominated, not just won the championship, but thrashed everyone, to be the team that's taking the risk. They should be in the safe spot. But the fact that they've gone for it with presumably quite a lot of development time, given they had such a dominant year last year, they had enough time to switch early. It smacks of confidence to me. You never know if it's going to work until it hits the track, but the bold approach for a team like Red Bull to switch away from that, it really does smack of confidence.
To call it a weakness is maybe overemphasising, but if they had a weakness, it was the slow corners, wasn't it? You look at Monaco, you look at Singapore, for them, trying to combat that. We saw AlphaTauri bring a new floor right at the end of the season to Abu Dhabi that seemed to be working. Can they take reference from that to help them this year with the one area where they slightly fell down last year?
I mean, possibly AlphaTauri actually had good slow speed performance at the end of last year. I think back to Mexico as well, where they were absolutely flying. I'd be surprised if there's too much going the other way from the RBs to Red Bull. I think the RBs will be taking as much as they can from Red Bull. Maybe a concept idea, you know, could be floated around in the paddock, but everyone is looking at everyone else already. So even day one morning of testing, there's going to be so many typically spy photographers out there getting all the shots they possibly can of all the cars. You can then see roughly where a car's strength and weakness lies. And I think Red Bull have got enough confidence in themselves probably to just look introspectively right now.
What have you made of Ferrari? We're on board with Charles there at the moment. He's gone quickest in Sector 1. Oh, Not quite
Screechy.
through there.
Screechy down at turn 8 for Charles Leclerc. So this is a C3, the medium compound again, and you can see immediately flat spot on the front right. So Leclerc had done an outlap, was winding it up for an attack there, and did the fastest first sector of anyone, and then just could not stop the car down for turn 8. There's a little bit of a tailwind there as well, stopping the drivers from decelerating quite as quickly as they like. It's a tricky downhill braking zone, and this will end the lap. He already got a little bit squirmy coming out of turn 6, and then big lock-up, braking and turning as well. And he's not the first driver to struggle to slow the car down there, but Charles, yeah, you can see just turning slightly in as well, unloading that inside front, not helping himself with the deceleration there, and the flat spot you can see on that front right there as it goes around might limit that set of tyres.
Every area of this car has been redesigned according to Enrico Cardile at the launch, and they said they focused as well on trying to reduce Red Bull's DRS advantage. So they've got a revised DRS on this.
Red Bull's DRS was such a
Incredible.
It was warp speed, wasn't it, when they did some of their DRS passes early in the season. I remember Melbourne, and Max flew past Lewis Hamilton for the lead of the race. And that is a key area of development now. The DRS, it can be worth half a second per lap, typically, with a couple of activation zones, can be even a little bit more. And that's in qualifying. It is a crucial performance area that I think a lot of the teams hadn't really looked into quite, or realised they could be exploited quite as much as Red Bull did earlier on. So that's a key area, not just for Ferrari, but a team like McLaren as well, who had not the most efficient DRS last year. That's one of their key areas of improvement for this season. Ferrari, I think, are quite interesting to watch, as well as Mercedes this year. Mercedes have gone for a new baseline of what they tried to start last year, but they were a bit stuck with the chassis choice they had for the zero.
You felt they were playing catch-up, didn't you, with the design a little bit?
Yeah, and it wasn't a blank canvas that they started with. They wanted the zero pod to still work this time last year, and then they scrabbled around to find a very good bodge to make it work, and found some performance late in the season. But this is a fresh start for Mercedes, so there's hope that they can move forward. Ferrari did a lot of great work at the end of last year, and we saw that with the win for Sainz in Singapore, but particularly the late pace that Charles had. A lot of pole positions, some better race pace as well, understanding the car and optimising it from the Dutch Grand Prix and then the Japanese Grand Prix, adding a new floor and getting Leclerc much more comfortable to extract the most out of it. And they're moving on from that baseline, and that's the order of the day really for Ferrari, is to try and get the rear settled and predictable, so that Leclerc can add some front and get the car rotating like he likes.
They're trying to get rid of the inconsistencies they had, aren't they? And also, you know, the Saturday car was so much better than the Sunday car, and that's not what you want.
It's always been the case for a long time with Ferrari as well. So a little bit, we spoke about Haas earlier on, trying to understand tyre deg and maximising your tyre use on a qualifying, getting the tyres into the right window, extracting the performance, but then not routing them too soon in a Grand Prix. It's a fine line, and this man was superb last year and it always has been, at extracting qualifying performance, but not so much in the race, where, you know, we all know his famed poles to wins ratio, which is still going. But he did improve on the last lap as well, and riding on board you can still see the flat spot, so there'll be a little bit more to come from Charles still.
Well, Max does still top the times though, Charles just slotting in behind him, and Laura is down in the pit lane for us at Williams, I think. Laura?
Yes, I am indeed. I headed up here. I did hear that Alex Albon earlier on had a smoking front right brake disc. Hearing that was no issue at all, but he is having some problems with the DRS within this FW46. He is in the car now, though. There isn't too much of an urgency around what the Williams mechanics are doing. It looks like he's going to be heading back out relatively soon. Much of the off-season winter work into this FW46 is making the car more drivable, giving the drivers a greater window for performance. And indeed also the display on the steering wheel has changed from the chassis to actually now within the steering wheel itself. Much hope, much optimism around Williams Racing. Alex Albon, of course, and Logan Sargent. We'll see him a bit later on. He, of course, has said he's put on 5 kilos over the winter, mostly in muscle. He said he felt light and generally quite unhealthy towards the end of last season, but has bulked up over the winter, had a very good refresh, and it'll be interesting to see him out on track a bit later on today. For now, though, Alex Albon within that FW46 for Williams. Issues with the DRS, I'll try and find out if they've been resolved or not. A little minor change for the display on the steering wheel as well. I am also hearing, I just heard, there is a very quirky, fun change to the Mercedes steering wheel as well. So I'm going to head down there and see what I can see and let you guys know about it.
Great. I'm intrigued now as to what that might be. I should let you know we've got Pat Fry and James Vowles coming up a little later on today, and we'll hear from the drivers as well across the 3 days and hear from them. And I was going to ask you actually, Jolien, because Williams are one of 4 teams that were doing a day here yesterday and running their cars in the filming days that they're allowed, the small amount of distance they're allowed, the 100k. They were one of the teams, McLaren, Mercedes, and there was one other as well were here yesterday. Doing a filming day. How much advantage is that to be able to get in here early? Everyone is allowed to do these filming days, of course. It just depends where and when you do them.
Well, the thing for Williams is that it was actually the first time they had the car on track, and so it's an advantage definitely to run a filming day before you turn up for testing. You can troubleshoot any problems. You can get a little bit of a read, and we see typically so many aero cruises where drivers are just going at a steady speed down a straight with an aero rake on, and just gathering data, and you can do that with a filming day. Just find something, crunch some numbers, give the design team, the engineers, some data to look through before you turn up for the official test. And I guess it's a chance for the drivers to dust off the cobwebs a little bit, feel the speed after a couple of months out. It's been a short winter. Feels like it's been a short winter as well.
Yeah, it has.
Back in the fray, but it's the same for the drivers. You know, it's someone like Logan who wasn't feeling his best last year. Has added 5 kilos is a lot to gain in the 5 kilos of muscle. That's some gym time.
5 kilos
Logan
is a lot. It's a lot of muscle.
He was struggling at the end of last year, wasn't he, Logan?
Yes, and he pulled out of Qatar. That was the exhaustion, but also, you know, it was a long, tough season for all of them.
And Qatar is heat exhaustion, but is the rest of your body as well. Like, Qatar's a physical circuit. It's a really high speed track. There's long loaded corners, and it's heat exhaustion, but when your body's already struggling maybe, then the heat takes it over the top. And it was obviously not just Logan that struggled, but he did retire from that one. But it's interesting to see his mindset this year. No longer the rookie. He's going to have to up his game and get closer to Albon, but obviously he's had a decent productive winter.
He does indeed. What was it like that first day back in the car after the winter? What was it like? What was the worst thing that night when you were trying to sleep? Was it the aching neck? Was it, what is it?
Well, I didn't have too many really reliable days when I first got in the car. So physically, I was always in decent shape, I think. I did, it was Barcelona, which was a more physical circuit than Bahrain. But I think the most laps I would have done in a day one of Barcelona must have been about 80 laps on a good day. And that just shows how testing's come on. Last year, Max did 160 laps on day one of testing. And yeah, your neck would take the brunt.
Straight to the physio.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. A nice rub down at the end of the day. Make sure that you're loose, because sometimes you'll be back in the car the next day as well. It comes really thick and fast, and you can't afford to not be on top of your game when you only get a day and a half in the car before the season. But the reliability has come on so much that well, big snap from Albon once again in the Williams. They could do 3 race distances today, and so you've got to be fit enough to do that. It's difficult to replicate the strain of a Formula 1 car in the gym, but it's your neck and your core muscles that are the classic ones.
Williams haven't suddenly taken on an orange sponsor. That's some Flowbiz paint on the back of that Williams right now as Alex takes it round. What did you prefer? Did you prefer doing a morning and then having the afternoon off and then back in the next day? Did you want to do a whole full day in one go? What did you prefer?
I was pretty easy going on it, actually. There's benefits to both. So today we've got only Max and George Russell in the cars for the whole day. Everyone else has split it, and that is keeping a bit of freshness of the drivers as well, because if you're doing 3 race distances, It can take its toll on you a little bit. It allows both drivers to get a feel on the car on each day if there's upgrades coming as well. So there's benefits to that. But then you've got you potentially lose a bit of time around lunch, changing pedal settings and seat and some technical changes on the car basically to accommodate the other driver. So I was pretty easygoing. I was an easygoing driver, Rachel.
You're very easy to interview as well. Always a pleasure.
I don't think everyone said that.
Actually, Laura was down at Williams, wasn't she? They were looking at that DRS, so he's just opened it there. And I wonder if that's, well, looks like it is the reason why they've got the Flovis bent. They're just checking the back of that Williams.
They had the Flovis on the nose a while ago, so I think they are running through a typical Flovis run plan. This is Albon, so he's fighting the car already coming into to turn 4, a little bit wide coming out of it over track limits, no problemo in pre-season, and then it was the snap here on the exit at turn 4. It didn't look so drastic when we jumped on board with him, but there we go, just fighting the rear of the car still, but exploring a bit of the scenery around this circuit as well, and that is on the harder tyre as well then for Albon, the C2. And he's already run the softer compound, the C4. So it's always easier to add grip, and when you take it away again, suddenly the car feels not so great. And Albon fighting it, but catching it nicely.
I'm always intrigued to see who is in the car at the end of the last day of testing. I always wonder how teams choose whether drivers have much input in it, because I would imagine you want to be the last person to drive that car before the race.
Oh yeah.
Right.
So that's roughly how you know who's the preferred driver, is who's driving the car.
That's what I was wondering. Is that number one in the team who's in the car on the Friday afternoon or whatever it is?
Oh yeah, that's the one. So if you're, especially somewhere like here, because it's going to be into the twilight and then the night time, the track will be at its best, the car will be in its final configuration, and you want to be the one driving it in basically what could be a qualifying mode at that point. So the mornings are a little bit hotter, the track's not as good, it could be sandier, dustier as well from the night before. You want to be in that car, and I think most of the drivers have been fighting for it. It just depends on the team really. They've got the final say in how it works. I remember when Nico Hulkenberg joined the team, suddenly it was like, right, you're getting mornings. Nico's getting the final day. I was thinking, oh no, this is where we're at, is it? No second driver clause, but there's a few things that sneak in, and you can tell who's the preferred driver in the teams usually by something like that.
On board with Charles again, who, as you say, on that last run actually did manage to get the lap out of it despite the flat spot on the tyres. So we're expecting to see some more time come from this Ferrari.
So they're all the Red Bull, Charles Leclerc here in the Ferrari, and Fernando Alonso did that time earlier on, all just 3/10 apart, all on the same tyre. We have no idea about engine motor and fuel, and it's very difficult to read into the testing times. But they've all been on the same tyre, sitting around a similar lap time. And Leclerc's thrown a few sets of this medium tyre at it, and he looks like he's done some level of performance style running in terms of a very slow out lap when Ant was out there at turn 2. He was crawling past, coming out of the pits, really trying to prepare the tyres. And that signals that he wants to get perfect for the first lap and maximise it, as is the way that he's been driving. Let's have a look at this replay down towards turn 8. And I think that's a different lock-up then for Charles. Same corner, still getting out to that curb on the entry. We'll see that here. Car bouncing quite a lot there as well. Gets out to that curb, he's slightly braking and turning, and look, this car looks so stiff suddenly. So I think they've made a suspension change. Car bouncing, looks really uncompliant, and Charles struggling with a little bit of locking.
Okay, well, while we have a closer look at this, Laura is down at Mercedes. Laura.
I teased you earlier on, didn't I, with
You did,
the
steering
quirky,
wheel.
fun change to the steering wheel. Exactly. I'd hope to show you at least a visual representation of the car, and you can all imagine the steering wheel in there. Unfortunately, as I came down to the garages here, we do have the barriers in place, suggesting that perhaps more than a small setup change is taking place within the garage. I then asked very nicely, and the lovely Adam McDade at Mercedes, who sent across the message about the steering wheel change, very kindly complied. I have the steering wheel in my hand. And what you can see here, for the drivers to now communicate with the team, they will press the WhatsApp button. Perhaps the smallest branding in all of world sport, certainly in Formula One, but a very fun way for Mercedes to demonstrate their partnership with WhatsApp. That is the button that the Mercedes drivers will be pressing to communicate with the team. Of course, it's on WhatsApp.
Brilliant stuff, Laura. Thank you very much, and thank you, Jolyon, who is popping out, but will be back with us a little later on as Charles is wheeled back into the garage now. We have a look. Second on the times then with a 1:33.2 behind Max Verstappen with a 1:33.0. Fernando Alonso there, third quickest so far with a 1:33.3. Temperature is ramping up outside. It's track temperature is now 38.2 with an air temperature of 24 degrees as Anthony Davidson seeks the air conditioning of this commentary box from being outside.
Hello. Yeah, it's much nicer in here. And I mean, it's more fun being out on track, that's for sure, watching the cars real time. And like I said, at the time, it was really good to be able to see the details up close, whereas the car is moving around and the driver really fighting it. But no, I'm not going to lie. It's a bit cooler in here, but it is nice to see the sunshine again. I'm not going to lie.
One of my highlights though from testing is going out trackside with you, and when you watch the cars and you can see how difficult some of them are to handle, you can see how easy some of them are, how compliant they are out on track, and just having you talk through what we're seeing with our eyes is always one of the highlights of testing. You must still enjoy actually watching them, or is it hard not being in it?
No, I do. I love watching it, actually. I mean, there's very little desire, actually, thankfully, from my side to get into the cars, because I know I wouldn't do them justice anymore. So it's, you know, we're trained athletes to be at your best and to get the best out of the car at all times, and you know, as soon as you step away for too long, then and Formula 1 just keeps evolving all the time. You know, if you jumped in, you wouldn't do the machinery justice anyway, so that you lack that desire then, therefore, to get in, as we see that lock up from Bottas into turn one. This is what I was talking about when I was down there. You see here just the inside wheel grabs. It's a bit bumpy there as well. One of the bumpier circuits that we go to these days, thanks to the older surface that we're on. And actually, there's the tunnel that you drive into the circuit through, and that leads under that section where Bottas, and that's why you get those bumps. The sinkage of the track surface creates the bumps, and yes, that's where you need a good ride quality from the car. If you haven't, combined with braking too late, obviously, as well, it can just grab the inside front wheel often into that one, and it ruins your apex straight away. You run wide, and then that messes up in turn two that follows on from there. And I really like the way those two corners link together.
You mentioned no desire to get back in a car right now, but you have been in the Mercedes sim, and there was a quote from Toto Wolff that in fact said that you told him the car was a proper car this year.
Yeah, I didn't realise that quote was going to come out.
So much trouble.
You take so much care not to slip up and tell the world about your feelings in the sim. But yeah, he did it for me, which is quite funny. What are we looking at here with Ocon just letting a car by? No.
Yes, he was. Yeah.
Oh, and yeah, that's actually
lock up from Alex Albon.
That's actually. From Albon's point of view, yeah, that's great. We've got this on board now. So you'll see what a distraction it is for him. You're not sure what that car's going to do, and that momentary loss, lapse in concentration is the end result there. That's not just the case of him. It's not a coincidence, basically, is what I was trying to say.
It was kind of a perfect storm.
It is. It's just, you know, we hear quite often the drivers saying on the radio to their engineer, don't talk to me in the corners. It's because it's that little distraction is enough to cause an error like this. And yeah, you know, ultimately it is Albon's fault that he ran wide, but there's a reason behind it. It is that your eye just wanders to the car on the left-hand side instead of looking where you're braking and where you're taking your car. And at that moment, you've gone in a bit too quick. You veer offline slightly. You maybe turn a bit too much and unload the inside wheel too much. That locks up. And a bit like turn one, I was saying before, you then start to run wide.
So which of the cars you saw on track earlier then has impressed you the most, or looks the easiest to handle and has the most potential?
Well, only in the slow speeds, where we are with Ocon right now, in the higher speed content of the track. There's no real high-speed corners here, more medium speed. And that's really predominantly Sector 3. So you've got 6 and 7, of course, where you can see one of the McLarens going through now, the top right-hand of the screen and the graphics. And then things start to speed up once you get to turn 11, 12, 13. So where I was in turn 1, There's actually, a very slow speed part of the track that we're coming into now, and you'll see just after the curb on the left-hand side comes out. He's braked it early on this particular lap, but that's your usual braking point just as the curb comes at you, and then you've got to slow it right down at the apex. And you're scrubbing off a huge amount of speed from travelling at 185 miles an hour down to around 50 miles an hour at the apex, and that's all done within about 120 metres. Pretty impressive stuff. So where I was standing, sorry, to answer your first question, for me, the Aston Martin looked pretty good in that particular part of the track. It was well poised on the braking. It looked easy to tuck into the apex where you need it. The rear looked pretty good when they tried to get on power early on, and then as you build up the speed through turn 2, the rear was still nicely settled. That's what you're looking for. The Red Bull looked a bit of a handful in the very slow speed part with the rear sliding too much. The braking was okay, but then as you build up speed through turn 2, the car looked, for me, it looked the best. But it also looked very heavy. You see it's lethargic in its change of direction.
I just wanted to pick up on this McLaren and why you would just have flow-vis on one side of the rear wing. Why would you have the flow-vis just on one half of the car there?
Well, I think you'd need to ask an aerodynamicist, but maybe they're just trying to save paint.
Well, you imagine both cars of the sides of the car are exactly the same, so I'm wondering what they're measuring on that side of the car in particular. Sam, I wonder if Sam's got any ideas on that for us, Sam. Why would they be putting it just on that one half of the car?
The answer's pretty simple, actually, because generally speaking, the cars are roughly symmetrical. Some of the cooling stuff's a bit different side to side, but generally the overall shape of the car is the same on both sides. So it's a bit pointless putting it on both sides of the car.
So it is saving paint.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing.
There you go.
Sometimes we try and make things far too complicated, don't we?
All right then, Sam.
Straightforward.
Why on the Williams we see the whole wing painted?
Because they've got more money to spend on paint.
Why would you therefore paint the whole thing then?
I mean, I think they're looking at different experiments. So if you want to look at the Williams, you can see the wing coming towards us. Actually, the whole wing is painted slightly differently across its span. You can see under the MS of the logo, it's a little bit more heavily painted than it is under the W at the start of the logo on the right-hand side of the car, coming towards us. It's on the left, of course. What I think you're looking at there is the team are doing experiments. It's like when you're doing your physics class in high school and you have to study the scientific method, where you've got to come up with a sort of a suggestion for the experiment, a methodology, then you run the experiment, and then the engineers have to go away and write up a report afterwards to see how that experiment worked out, and then they have a think about how to improve the design of the car. So I suspect you may actually be seeing two completely separate experiments going on the rear wing. But also, because, as I said, the cooling stuff on the car isn't exactly symmetrical side to side, at the rear of the car, you may want to do it right across the span of the rear wing, because the hot gases and the stuff coming out the back of the car could be different side to side.
Great stuff. Thank you very much for that, Sam. I mean, I didn't do very well in physics at school, but I do remember method, results and conclusion, wasn't it? That's how we had to do experiments.
It was actually, was that the bit of the
I'm not
car
sure,
that fell there, or did it just flick something from the circuit that was already there?
Did they
it was
pick
hard
up
to see from that shot.
What came off? I wanted to ask you, actually, Sam was talking about cooling there. There is something loose on the right rear.
Oh yeah, good spot. Did it come from there? Is that just a bit of tape or a bit of carbon flapping around? But yeah.
I was going to ask you, we had this conversation in the car on the way in this morning, in fact, to the track, about cooling, and have Red Bull taken the cooling, the tiny cooling? Do you remember we were talking about it from when Mercedes had the zero pods? They had to have this very special, almost rocket invented for rockets cooling system that was very, very small and could fit in because of these tiny side pods, this cooling device, this cooling mechanism, and have Red Bull been able to adapt that? Because did Mercedes sign an exclusive deal for this?
Well, yeah, as you start to tighten the bodywork around the car, you need to then have smaller radiators, and I guess that becomes the limitation. And but you know, people are fascinated with the side pods on these cars. It's not about the side pods. It's really not about the side pods. It's about the floor. That's where most of your grip comes from. And it's not just about the shape of the floor either. It's how the floor moves around in the turbulence and the airflow that it generates. and around anywhere from 60 to 80% of the car's total grip at 300 kilometers an hour, so 186 miles an hour, comes from the floor.
So are the
people
side
get
pods a
fascinated by-
distraction where it says, look here, don't look here?
Maybe. I mean, I'm sure the way it interacts with the rear wing and all that, it has some purpose, but the real essence is the floor. And that's the bit we can't see. So the bit we can see are the side pods. So we start to get transfixed by that, the aesthetics of it all. But the cooling is important. Let's see what Red Bull do. If they go to 0 side pods in the future, which we're predicting in their later iterations of their design this year, then it goes to show that the 0 pod concept wasn't such a flop after all. It's just a different solution to cooling.
Well, the floor is, without doubt, I mean, the biggest area of development on these cars, and you try and keep it secret unless you crash in Monaco and your car is craned for the whole world to see and everyone gets to see the underside.
But then it's still secret because nobody knows the different layers of carbon that you're using and the way that the floor can potentially move around as well within all those shapes, the different types of carbon and strengths of carbon that are used within the floor. That's the magic.
Different strength will give you different airflow, will give you different...
Yeah, I guess so. And that's the bit no one, even if you gave a blueprint of the shape, if someone was given, you know, the shape of a floor, it still wouldn't react the same. Because it's how you build the floor as well.
So Sam, I want to bring you in on this because, I mean, we obviously saw the floor of that Red Bull, we saw the floor of the Williams, and we saw the differences between the two last year, and you can see how much that Red Bull floor has been developed. So what other areas are we looking at? Because when the teams talk about it, and they talk about the undercut on the side port, they talk about, you know, what they're trying to achieve with that floor. Can you just expand on that for us?
Well, expansion is one of the things you're going to be looking at, how the floor shape changes, the contours, those little details. But the thing about it, and you hear this all the time, and you were absolutely spot on earlier, Rachel, that, you know, everybody's looking at the side pod. Actually, it's the floor that's the really important bit. But Ant's absolutely spot on as well. You can't look at a Grand Prix car and say this aerodynamic part does this. You don't know unless you've got the CAD model, the actual CAD model, or the wind tunnel model, or even better, the real car, and you can stick some sensors over it. You can't really say for certain what all of those little wobbly bits on the floor are all about. So if someone does go off at Monaco and it gets craned up for us all to take pictures of, you're still doing a lot of guesswork, and what you have to do in that situation is sculpt those little edges, and then you start to see on the top of the floor the undercuts of the side pod. Then you start to learn exactly what you were talking about before, that it's that upper surface of the floor and how it works with the lower surface, how the teams are trying to seal the floor edges, build up on that ground effect, and almost have invisible sliding skirts, get that downforce working, but in such a way that it works all the way around the lap. Because when a car goes around a corner, it's a bit like your road car in a roundabout. It leans over. Even though they're super stiff, there's still a few millimetres of movement, and that's enough to change the airflow under the car. And just managing those little changes of vortexes, the change of the aerodynamic airflow. If you're sitting in the bath just when it's all finished and there's sort of a bit of, that soapiness on the top, doesn't work if you've got bubble bath in, and you run your fingers through it, you can see all those eddy currents behind your finger when you run it through the top of the bath. That's what you're looking at, but in 3 dimensions, and trying to understand that is how you get the most out of the downforce. And that's what the teams are all trying to do with their floors. So just looking at another team's floor, it's not going to be a great help, but it might get the old grey matter going, it might get you thinking, and it might get you thinking about what you're doing on the leading edge of the side pod, just underneath those ducts. That's a critical area just to help the rest of the floor work.
Great stuff. Thank you very much for that, Sam. Was that solar panels we saw on the Ferrari pit wall just there?
Yeah, it was. I don't know if they were there last year, but if that's a new addition, that's very cool, isn't it?
I mean, weather-wise last year, we had, at the start of the season, anyway, for the first half of the season, an awful lot of rain. But when we do go to these hotter, sunnier places...
Yeah, it might not be very effective in Spa, but in Bahrain, where we are right now, really, really good. Maybe they're just going to store the energy here and take it elsewhere.
Except for during F2 testing when it rained here. But
yeah, it doesn't usually last for long. I have seen it rain here before, but yeah, never... It's not like the winter we've had in the UK, just put it that way.
No, you're talking to someone with a roof leak. I know how much it's rained this winter. Right, OK, let's get back to the cars on track then and what we're seeing at the moment, because we've only got 19 laps for George Russell so far, 30 38 for Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin, 38 for Yuki Tsunoda.
Wow,
And
that's
the
a big old
RB,
lock-up. Big old
lock-up.
lock-up from Charles. But, and here, you know, it's that bump I'm talking about. Yeah, see, it goes over the bump and it carries on through to the braking zone of 1, but he is really trying to lean on the car there, maybe a bit too hard. Looks like he's carrying that flat spot on the right front as well. Now that tyre probably done. And Albon comes back into 9 and 10 without a car in his way this time, and still suffering with the front left locking up. Now that's one part of the track where typically the driver, you saw the switch changes on the steering wheel. I saw you were talking about it earlier on, the radio button on the Mercedes. But one of the tools that the driver can play with, of course, is the brake migration tool. And that's just a bit of the paint that's flicked up from the tyre. Yeah. It was a nicely painted surface off track, not so much anymore, but maybe they'll give it another lick before race week. But yeah, so the drivers typically into that corner, turn 9, before it tightens into 10, will go rearward on the brake bias, depending on where the wind direction's coming from, just to try and stop that from happening. And the brake migration tool as well, or the saturation tool, whatever the teams call it, they will pretty much do the same thing, and that it does exactly that. It migrates the balance from being predominantly more to the front, then a little bit more to the rear, giving the car a little bit of what it's called a handbrake effect as you turn into the corner. And so it's just one of the many tools that you have. You've got the differential as well, of course, that can help you out in a slower speed corner like that to open it up more, to help rotate the car, pivot the car, I mean by that. And yeah, sometimes you need to go more, just to tune it more as the tyres start to wear more, or if the wind starts to pick up or change direction. And even if you're behind another car and you're in the turbulence that Sam was talking about earlier on, the turbulence can really affect the attitude of the car. And here is that corner, so you're coming in, you're slowing down and turning at the same time, and then you increase the steering angle as you get to turn 10. You're asking a hell of a lot from the car at that point. You've got to be quite careful on the brake pedal as you get deeper into the corner to kind of bleed off a bit of pressure from the brakes, because you daren't have that front locking. If you have rear locking there, you'll spin the car. But it's more often the case that you'll have a bit of front locking because the front becomes unloaded.
It's a good corner to watch, actually. Through 9 and 10 is a good place to go and watch on track, actually, to see which cars are the ones that are compliant, which cars are the ones that I remember we watched there, and I think it was the Haas that year that we saw was really struggling every time on that corner, and so it turned out at the start of that season. And it was, yeah, and we saw the Alfa Romeo back then as well was a pretty sweet handling car at the start of 2022 with its shorter wheelbase, and it really helped it in the corner like that, and it looked like a much easier car to drive than many. The one thing that really stands out, though, all of the teams have got this porpoising sorted out, haven't they? Do you remember when you look back to 2022? Yes. The difference in ride quality. I mean, it's the same set of regulations. Same bumps on the track. Same bump, it's the same track. It hasn't changed at all. And my goodness, the cars look so much better over the bumps, but also the grip they have. Slow speed and high speed, the cars are so much more stuck to the ground now than ever before with this, still relatively speaking, new set of regulations. That's the progress of Formula One, and that is with the cost cap as well. Imagine where they'd be without it, spending their old 350 million a year on just car development alone. I mean, they were impressive times, but it's remarkable to see that relentless progress that all these teams make year after year. I mean, it's going to be fascinating once we get on track this weekend in qualifying to see who's made a step up as you get to the end of the regulation. You'll see less time gain here on this particular circuit compared to other tracks we go to. So where will we get the first real idea? So we've got Saudi Arabia after this is a street track. We're not really expecting, we won't get a proper idea there. So we're looking at Albert Park, are we looking at Suzuka? Well, in terms of, I mean, it does have relevance. This circuit does have relevance, but for other circuits you come to later in the year that have slower speed corners. So yeah, you have to look out for Sector 1 here. Maybe the Ferrari we're looking at on screen now, maybe that will be brilliant in the slow speed.
compared to the Red Bull, say, in qualifying. And then you can decipher whether it will be good at circuits like Monaco or Singapore or other slow-speed circuits on the calendar that we come to, and then look at other sectors from the circuit, like Sector 3, a bit higher speed, and then you can deduce, well, okay, maybe Melbourne or Saudi, it'll be good on circuits like that. But yeah, for this track, it's all I'm saying is if you're finding aerodynamic gains from the car, which is what most of them would have found, there's a bit you can do, some trickery to the mechanical side of things in a Formula 1 car. They'd love to have active ride suspension, but the active ride suspension and the suspension today is mostly about trying to energize the aero effects of the car, because that is the key. And even at slow speed, you do have a lot of aerodynamic dominance from the grip. That's why they all run the highest wing angles at the slow speed circuits like Monaco and Singapore. So you're trying to just energize the aero influence of the car at all times, and you even sacrifice some mechanical components and elements of that mechanical balance and grip, say like suspension design, for example. Kinematically, it might not make that much sense to run these cars if they had no wings or ground effects on them at all. You probably wouldn't run the suspension anything like the shapes that they run here. It's because it's all about trying to build the aero advantage. So when you do go to circuits that are higher speed, you'll see naturally, because you get even more aero effect at higher speed, you'll see the lap times from old separate even more.
Okay, just had one quick question for you on the Ferrari. They've got a different rear suspension to the rest of the grid. So they've stuck with the pull rod suspension. Everyone else has gone push rod at the rear. Can you just briefly tell us, or if Sam wants to come in on this, tell us the difference, what they are achieving others aren't, or what they are trying to achieve others?
Well, I mean, of course it will be aerodynamics, but Sam will be able to, no doubt, go into more detailed analysis. Take it away, Sam.
Absolutely right, Anne. It is all about aerodynamics, but there are some mechanical considerations as well. Red Bull, Max Verstappen, you see him sitting in his garage there getting ready to go out for a run. They have a pull rod front suspension, which means the diagonal spindly bit at the front wheel goes downwards from the outside to the middle of the car, because all of the suspension components, the springs and dampers, they're not coil springs, they're torsion bar springs on most cars. They're mounted at the bottom of the car, they're bottom of the chassis. That lowers the centre of gravity height significantly. It's in theory better aerodynamically, according to some teams. Other teams don't agree, of course, and you can see it's just mounted at the bottom of the chassis there. That makes it much, much harder to make suspension adjustments. Mechanically, it's far more complicated. Then you've got layouts like the Williams. Here you can see it with the nose off, which is quite a nice shot. You can see it's a push rod front suspension, so the diagonal bit goes from the low point on the wheel upwards to the chassis, and all of its suspension components are mounted up on the top underneath that number 23 for Alex Albon. That makes it much easier to work on the car. It's in theory slightly lighter, and it's just a simpler solution. And some teams, Williams clearly one of them, don't believe it's a big aerodynamic disadvantage. So it's a little bit reversed at the rear of the car, because it's a more complicated area of the car, because you've got the gearbox, and the gearbox layout defines the layout of the rear suspension. And actually, not every team makes its own gearbox. So Red Bull, for example, does make its own gearbox, but they also supply that gearbox to the RB team. So the RB team has to use the same layout as Red Bull. Mercedes, they supply gearboxes to Aston Martin, to Williams, and they have to use the Mercedes layout, whichever Mercedes choose. Ferrari, though, at the rear of their car, they've decided to go quite a different way to everybody else, and they've stuck with the opposite design to everybody else. They've gone for a pull rod rear suspension, and the Haas have to use that as well. The Kick Sauber team, they make their own gearbox now as they get ready to be turned into Audi, and so they've gone for the same route as everybody else, including Red Bull, which is the push rod rear, because that gives you a little bit more space for the diffuser and rear aerodynamics, at least in theory. So it's all about the mechanical gubbinses of the car, but actually aerodynamics is king of everything in reality.
Isn't it just? Thank you very much, Sam.
Kind of like what I said, but better.
I mean, I didn't want to say, but yes. Max Verstappen is back out again on those yellow marked C3
C3 time. C3 tyre.
3
There's the
tyres.
yellow, yeah.
Sorry, C3. Sorry, 4 is the C4 is the red tyre.
So that's going to be our softest tyre that we have next week.
Danny Ricciardo and Yuki Tsunoda. I'm going to struggle calling them RB because that's what I get called because they're my initials.
Oh, of course.
So I get called RB all the time. So now I'm getting really confused.
You're going to be looking around over your shoulder all the time.
I'm doing that all the time. So I hope they have a good season. Otherwise, it could be quite awkward for me.
It'll look good on your CV.
Great on my CV. Talking of somebody who's got a great CV, Ted Kravitz. He's down in the pit lane for us at the moment. Ted.
Thank you, Rachel. Hello, Rach. Hello, Ant. Hello, everybody. Again from the pit lane. Yes, Rachel, both you and in Formula One at least, Rubens Barrichello, Ross Brawn and Ruth Buscombe also have those issues with RB. But yeah, RB's fine for the rest of us. Right, you're talking about suspension. Sorry I've been away, by the way. I've been recording a bit for this evening's testing notebook where I tried to sum up everything that's happened in Formula One over the winter in 60 seconds. And Rachel, do you think I managed it?
Yes, Ted, I have absolute faith. Oh.
I didn't. It took me about 90, it took me about a minute 12. So I couldn't even do that. But yeah, you'll be able to see what that is later. But just to let you know what's happening at Williams, if you're wondering why they're not out on track at the moment. They're trying something different on the front suspension. So a different solution to not only the front suspension torsion bars, but I'm also seeing a ride height adjustment and maybe a camber change as well. So one of those things that they do, just to go through the range of suspension options. And you know, when you're sort of describing pull rod or push rod, as you have been over the last few minutes, I like to sort of do a little experiment with my hands. And here's one that you can do. If you pretend that your fist is the tire, and then the push rod, you can put the side of your hand. That's fine for the chassis. So push rod is your finger pushing against it like that. That's on the Williams. You can see the suspension upright going into the side of the chassis. It's a push rod, and as the tire takes some load or the car goes into heave, which is up and down, or yaw, and you can imagine the push rod pushing against. That's quite a natural thing. Invert it. That's the tire, and that's the pull rod. And imagine the pull rod being pulled out. Then it's being pulled out by the rocker and the suspension arm insides from underneath. It feels a little bit different. It feels sort of physically, kinematically, if you want to say that, a little bit not what you would normally do with a suspension arm, having it pull out something from the chassis, almost that it's going to pull out the bit itself and separate the wheel from the chassis. Doesn't happen, of course. But yeah, as you've been saying, it's mainly aerodynamic rather than kinematic, because they sort of do the same things. And Williams have decided to go push rod at the front, and I believe they have kept with push rod. They've gone to push rod at the back, albeit a very narrow angle, as you were saying, because Mercedes have gone that way through and they use a Mercedes gearbox. So yeah, I'll leave you to some images of the front of the Williams and quite detailed changes that are going on. By the way, Rachel and Anthony, have you had a word about the fat noses? I just went past Alpine, and their nose is really, really rotund, isn't it? Really wide, really flat, really fat. And this Williams is actually quite a sort of fat nose as well. I will get to the bottom between now and the end of testing of exactly why that is, why we're seeing none of the slim noses that we saw last year.
Great. I look forward to it, Ted. I would say, actually, on the Aston Martin as well, they have the colouring, the green colouring on the nose, and then at the bottom, it's back to carbon fibre, and it's in the way, and it's shaped in the way that some, and you won't understand this, but some dresses are, in that you have a panel down the middle that's a light colour, and down the sides you have black, and it gives you gives you a slimmer silhouette, and it feels like that's what's been done on the Aston Martin. When you look at the nose of the Aston Martin, it has a slimmer silhouette, but actually when you look at it closely in the light, you will see it's just as wide and fat as everyone else's.
Very well described. Yeah, it makes complete sense. And I mean, it's not just about the saving of weight, is it? You know, with all the extra carbon fibre panels and areas that we're seeing on these cars, as they still struggle to meet the weight limits that's quite aggressively set, I must say, by the FIA within the regulations, and that's why we see so much black area on the cars. It's just carbon fibre. They can't they really can't afford to put the paint on in literal terms, of course, but in terms of weight, it is a currency to them.
But these cars are the heaviest they'll be all season, though, right now, aren't they, at testing? I mean, they will find ways where they lose weight throughout the rest of the car, and the paint will come on towards the end. They will be more colourful by the end of the season.
I hope so. I hope so, because I think it's quite a serious issue, I think, for the fans. They like seeing the differences between the cars' liveries, and we don't want to see the cars mostly painted black. We want to see them have their own identity. And I think the fans really, they deserve that. They deserve to see the cars and teams able to showcase the differences between the liveries, the cars out there. I mean, and I personally, I don't like seeing them struggling to meet that weight limit and having to resort to taking away colour from the car.
Oscar Piastri out at the moment, putting some more laps on the board now. 25 for him so far, 4th quickest as yet this morning. But Mercedes, George Russell's only done half the number of laps of Max Verstappen and Fernando Alonso, for example, right now. Just 19 laps for George Russell in the Mercedes so far today. You actually want to get out there and get running, don't you?
Yeah, I think, a lot of the teams, particularly Mercedes, were focused on doing, we saw those aero rakes on the car earlier on, and that's extra weight going on as well. That, like you touched on, Rachel, they're saying that all the teams are putting extra weight into the car in terms of extra sensors, and it'll be no more so than this first day of testing. It takes time to take all that equipment, all those extra sensors off the car, and you can be talking about 20 kilos plus of extra weight on these cars at this stage. So maybe they're just going through the program there in terms of those aero rakes on the car, and then starting to then get into perhaps some more lengthy setup changes as the rest of the day unfolds. The interesting thing about the first day of testing is that you see a progression of the circuit in terms of how green it starts. By that I mean not much rubber down on the track. We call it a green track when we're talking of a circuit that's quite new. It hasn't had much running on, and it's quite dusty, especially here in the desert. It gets very dusty, and it takes time to basically clean the track up. And you're using these cars as big hoovers. They're just getting that dust off the racing line, and it starts to get more rubbered in, and the tyre likes to work on top of its own rubber rather than on a slippery, grainy, green surface. So as that continues to rubber in today, the circuit will improve in speed, but then it starts to get hotter, and the wind usually picks up here more in the afternoon as well, and that diminishes the progression of the track that it naturally would get. If it just stayed stable temperatures and wind condition, you'd just see the lap times on a nice plot on the graphs getting faster and faster and faster. The car would feel nicer and nicer. No matter what you did to it, you'd be saying, yeah, that setup change is better. Oh yeah, even this one, that's another improvement again. Whereas today ends up staying quite flat in its progression, because as the track rubbers in, it also gets hotter and more windy.
But then it gets cooler because we're running until 7 o'clock tonight. So do you not cover most of the conditions you'll face across the season apart from rain? When you
so later on it'll have, the race takes part in the dark here, we're dusk to dark. So the track continues to get faster and faster, and that's what they're going to experience later on today. But tomorrow morning, when they hit the track at the same time they did today, it's going to feel much improved from how they end today, and it's very easy therefore to start getting lost in what setup changes have a bigger influence in terms of a positive change or a negative change. Sometimes you put something on the car or you try a setup option that you don't really feel it's any better, particularly if it's a lengthy change and the track's continuing to get hotter. So tomorrow is the interesting one, because it will start fast and then just get slower and slower as the day goes on, because you've already got the track nicely rubbered in from day one, and then it just continues to get slower as it gets hotter. And that's the point of tomorrow afternoon, where you can easily start getting lost as a driver and as a team, where the team are expecting one thing to be highlighted and the driver say, actually that felt much worse, or at best it was a transparent change. And I used to love that in my testing days, really having
You used to love getting lost.
No, just having to stay disciplined and having to stay honest with what setup change was genuinely better or worse, and going through it very scientifically.
And not just your driving.
Well, no, and your driving has to stay consistent as well. So getting yourself up to speed as a driver is super important. And they will be dialing themselves in a lot of the time through this first day. It takes longer than you think, actually, to get right up to speed, where you can slap a new set of tyres on and nail it every time within a couple of tenths of each other. So you need the consistency from your driving. That's where better drivers out there will be an advantage, because you can start working through the testing program more methodically and accurately, more importantly, than other drivers that are taking longer to get up to speed. And that's what I like to see, the skill of the driver really coming into it.
Just having a look at the Red Bull rear wing as part of their upgrades this year, which kind of surprised everybody. The last team to launch, weren't they, as well? The last team to show off what they were bringing, and then everybody was surprised, which, as we were talking to Jolien about earlier on, it's great to see them still innovating despite dominating last year, despite walking away with the championship with more than double the points of their nearest rival in the constructors, and Max winning it so easily. They are still innovating.
And you look at that car coming towards you down that main straight, it's just straight as a dart, isn't it? It does not move. They've completely mastered the attitude of the car. Look at it, absolutely stiff. That's what you want for the aerodynamics. You don't want it to be diving around or bouncing and porpoising. And even the Red Bull in 2022, we were raving about its ride quality, but wow, it looks so stuck down now. Even in the straight line, it's so smooth the way it rides the bumps. Very impressive. When you think, I mean, it's like almost like looking at an active ride car, the active ride suspension. It's like it's got this, these fancy road cars you get today with air suspension and active ride. It looks like one of those coming towards you, not a car that should be heavily influenced by, in a mechanical sense, the bumps on the track. It's really masterful how they've managed to make it look so well poised there. Because you watch any other category of racing that comes here. So I come here for the World Endurance Championship, for example. It was the last race of last year, and the cars buckaroo and bounce all the way down the straight, and it really highlights this track for what it is. It is a bumpy racetrack.
But the Red Bull making it look not so.
At this point, yeah. Here it comes again. I mean, I know they might not be running it so aggressive in terms of the ride heights. It still, to me, looks like quite a heavy car, and they're clearly doing race run performances. So a little kick up of dust from the back of the car there over the biggest bump that we have here, just over that bridge section. And there they are at RB, Daniel Ricciardo, studying the data with his engineering team. And at this stage, you're so eager to get in the car.
I was going to say, is he looking at it going, I can't wait to get in there.
Of course.
I can't wait to get in there this afternoon and take it round myself. Well, I was talking to Jolien about this. Which were you? Were you the driver that got the morning session or the afternoon session? Did you ever get to run last?
It wasn't like that. Back in my day, as they say, we had... In
black and white, was it?
Yeah, we had dodging dinosaurs on the track and all sorts. Yeah, it was...
so just before you come to that, that's a lot of Flowbiz paint, Anthony.
But that really goes to show how the car penetrates the air first with the front wing. Then the suspension comes into it. The wheels, of course, as well, create a huge amount of turbulence. And that's what they're looking at. They're looking at that. That is the whole journey of the airflow from the start of the car to the rear. And that's what Sam was talking about. You can't just put somebody else's front wing on your car, because it will influence wrongly, I guarantee it, wrongly, the way that the rest of the airflow goes over the rest of your bodywork that you've designed to be in conjunction with the front wing.
And the front wings themselves are quite incredible, because I remember when Aston Martin brought a different front wing to a race last year, and going up to it and looking at the changes that were so minute but had such an impact on the airflow on the car.
Absolutely, and again, it's no fluke or coincidence that they've heavily painted the suspension as well at the front of the car. That's nothing to do with mechanical grip or balance, pure aerodynamics.
And that's the car I was talking about a little earlier on that had the new floor towards the end of last season and saw some real improvements from it. OK, so back to what we were talking about in testing then. It wasn't in your day, you didn't get to run an afternoon session or be the last one in the car?
Well, we had no simulation. We had no driver simulators when I was racing. So that's another thing that's really improved.
It was tough in your day, wasn't it? It was much harder in your day.
Well, I mean, physically, yeah, because we were doing about 15,000 kilometres of testing.
Was it unlimited?
I think it was, we had a whole separate testing team within the team itself. And we're going to see probably running wide in turn 4. Should be, the wind is on your side actually turning into that corner, but you go through the crosswind as you go through it, and so they're turning in with pretty good grip, and it's probably disappearing a bit as they go through the corner. It's a very tricky corner, turn 4. Very, very tricky, because it dips down, it's cambered, not in your favour, so negative camber, so it catches the car quite awkwardly on the exit, and it's either the rear trying to let go or the front pushes on. But yeah, things start to get a bit easier after that, and the higher speed of 6 and 7. And here's Oscar Piastri into the final corner. I always get beaten up for this in the simulator when I refer to turn 14 as the final corner, because there are 15 corners.
You just don't consider 15 as a corner, so...
Not really. It can catch you out if you haven't prepared 14 properly.
Well, George Russell is out. Mercedes say just been doing some usual testing changes. That's why he was in the garage for so long. So the only car still in the pit lane right now is Kevin Magnussen for Haas, and Ted's down there for us. Ted.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, so nothing to worry about, say, Mercedes. I can tell you that I was about to call them Alfa Romeo, Sauber have just made a nose and front wing change to Valtteri Bottas. So he's just trying a different spec front wing and nose cone on his run that you're seeing at the moment on the timing. And at Haas, it seems to be some sort of fuel system related issue that they've been trying to figure out. So if you can see this mechanic with his arm buried deep into the fuel area, I don't know if it's actually in the fuel tank itself or just in the sort of area around it. That seems to be what the issue that they've been grappling with. So, unlike Mercedes, who've already had the filming day yesterday and are just making the usual testing changes, this does seem to be something that's gone slightly wrong and that they need to fix. Now, of course, I know it's a truism, but it's worth repeating. When each driver has only got a day and a half, and the team themselves have only got 3 days to sort their cars out before the start of the season, and that's it. To gather all the data they need for the driver to get all the practice he needs, and for them to work on reliability, having, what's this, the second little reliability issue of the day after the rake came off. I suppose they can't really call that a reliability issue, but it stopped them anyway. For Haas, isn't the greatest start to testing so far, but this has kept them in the garage. There's the new boss, Ao Komatsu, on the right-hand side as we look at it. So this has kept them in the garage for, what has it been, half an hour, I think? Rachel, probably half an hour, 40 minutes, something like that?
Yeah, something like that, 32 laps.
Just about.
Yeah, they've got on the board.
Yeah. Looks like they're just about done with the repair. So that's good news. And if we look on the right-hand side, talking about Sauber, such as the preponderance, the enthusiasm which they're embracing fluoro green. Whenever you see, I've got to tell you, whenever you see anything else fluoro green in the pit lane, you think, oh, the team borrowed this off Sauber. So it's a really weird sense, because when you do go down to the Sauber garage, I mean, everything. If it's got a surface, they are going to throw fluoro green at it, and that also extends, I've got to tell you, to the pit box itself. I don't know if you've noticed it, Rachel, but I think you're coming down to relieve me in a minute, or you'll come down and have a look. You know the pit boxes, which are normally decked out in white or yellow tape. Well, have you seen this? That also at Sauber here is fluoro green.
Okay.
There you go. So yeah.
Wow.
If it's got carbon fibre, or if it's living, breathing, or not, paint it green. That's the philosophy down here at Sauber.
Well, Ted, you're looking very well next to the green. You can actually, I think you probably carry. Oh, I'm not sure actually. I was going to say you can carry it off. It's a very difficult green to carry off. Thank you very much, Ted.
Could use that as a green screen, couldn't he? Put him anywhere.
You could actually. That's a very good point. Stand in front of it, and he could be anywhere in the world. But he is in fact at the Sauber garage. This is Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin on track right now, and currently third fastest with a 1:33.3, so 8/10 behind the lap Max Verstappen has put on the board, which was a 1:32 a little earlier actually. He broke the 1:32, so Fernando going around now. Some good mileage, 51 laps for the Aston Martin, the most of any team so far today.
Yeah, it's looked good in terms of reliability. It's looked good when I was out on the circuit earlier on. I still think it was at that particular time the best car through turn 1. He could get the car turned very nicely. The rear looked good as he started to get on power, and then build the speed through turn 2, where you need to rely a bit more towards the aerodynamic performance of the car, and even there it looked really good. So they've hit the ground running of Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso, and it looks like they're now working on a race run on the C3 tyre, the medium, which will be the next week's soft tyre. And there we go. So 7 or nearly 8 seconds. 8 seconds off the fastest time, which is a sure sign that the car is heavy, older tyres, race run spec, a managed battery state of charge as well. So you're not giving it full beans for that one lap. You're in that happy equilibrium between. It's a bit of give and take really for the battery when you're in the race run. It seeks a bit of harvesting from the kinetic side from the car, and then delivers some battery power as well. And you're always trying to keep the SOC, the state of charge of the battery, somewhere in the middle on a race run. But for a qualifying or a shorter run attempt, you'll be more aggressive, there'll be more deployment than harvesting, and therefore you get a lot more speed. It can be up to a second's worth or more of performance.
Dan Fallows saying that you'll see obvious differences on this Aston Martin, the nose and the front wing, but he says there are lots you won't see. We've gone for a lighter, more aerodynamically efficient race car that will operate across a wider range of circuits. But one of the teams, as I mentioned earlier, to say they've got a good platform for development, and it's an evolution, a strong evolution of their car from last year, which started very well, dipped away in the middle of the season, and then they seem to find some answers again slightly towards the end.
I think most of them will just be a strong evolution from last year's car. Some, more towards heavier development. But again, I think the cost cap really restricts you in terms of how, and also the actual regulations of these cars. I mean, we heard it right from the word go, but they were quite restrictive from the regulations. That's why they all end up looking fairly similar straight away. Very little variation in design from this modern, this current generation of Formula 1 car.
Ted's down at Alpine. Ted.
Well, let's have a look. One thing that testing is also about is to check that everything's legal. So have a look at this at Alpine. They're about to do a nose change. But look at the stickers on the inside of the end plate. That's connected to a camera. So either side, see the FI logo on this new nose. That's a camera in the camera mounting. It's a camera that belongs to Alpine, and it's looking at those points, what look like sort of basic QR codes on the inside of the end plate, and that is to measure the flexion of the front wing, because they have to check that it's doing what they want aerodynamically, but they also have to check that it's not going to flex too much. The outer parts of that front wing is not going to flex too much beyond the legality, and the only way of doing that, to be sure, as well as measuring it with sensors, is to do it this way with the camera. It's the kind of thing that we've seen before, haven't we, Rach and Anthony? We've seen teams put little dots or something on the inside. It's not actually by regulation, whereas the dots on the rear wing to measure rear wing deflection is something they have to do by regulation. But yeah, looking close up at this Alpine, it's actually a very tidy car. They've taken some weight out of the car, not least with not very much paint or stickers, and tidied up the other bits, not least to the rear suspension, the gearbox, the changes at the rear they wanted to make. And the front seems sensible as well. They've gone with the full span front wing flaps, sort of unlike Mercedes. Again with the fat nose on the Alpine. Rachel, what is it with these fat noses? Why have they got so much wider rather than last year. But as I say, I will find out. More of a kind of Red Bull Ferrari inspired from last year side pod entries, but with a nicely sized undercut towards the rear of the car as well. So yeah, you see Esteban Ocon with that different front wing. I'm sure they'll make another change before his next run.
Great, thank you, Ted. They might also be picking out a few bits of gravel, mightn't they, Ant? We just saw him go off there as you were talking, Ted, on a replay. Quite a big moment for him.
Yeah, he just lost the rear. It snapped on him. It's what the drivers called a snap oversteer moment. Getting on power. I mentioned turn 4 earlier on. It either understeers progressively or can have the rear let go. But that was quite a wild snap. And he did well to keep the car pointing in a fairly straight line, but obviously dragged him off the circuit and through that little bit of gravel as well, which yeah, can do damage not just to the front wing, but also to the underside of the car as well, the floor, that very delicate floor that we were talking about earlier on. Any kind of damage to that floor is going to be quite costly in lap time, as we saw from the likes of Fernando Alonso in Barcelona qualifying last year, where just one small trip through the gravel on the exit of the final corner in, I think it was Q2, maybe it was even Q1, and yeah, he waved goodbye to a lot of performance there that particular day. So yeah, damage the floor from a small moment like that, and yeah, it ends up being a much more costly mistake than you'd imagine.
Ferrari have called this season Operation Relaunch.
Operation Relaunch?
Which is... it's quite a bold, well, it's a bold statement. It certainly suggests almost going back to the drawing board, doesn't it? But they actually had some good development last year.
Yeah, I mean, you'd say, I know they finished behind Mercedes ultimately in the championship, but they're the ones that won a race, other than Red Bull. The only team that won a race. And Leclerc goes a bit wide in turn 13. Yeah, the teams have to... One thing, just seeing there again, compared to the Red Bull, the car's bouncing a lot.
It is bouncing.
And that's one thing that Ferrari have never seemed to completely get rid of in their car. And yeah, you see it there, just front just fluttering up and down, those inconsistencies of ride height change, sparking away again as it goes over the bumps before turn 1. Just, you know, it just seems like they still haven't fixed that, which I see as a bit of a weak link in their design philosophy at Ferrari. And there was just losing the rear in 13 as we saw the effects of real time. So yeah, it's just, you go through a lot of crosswind in turn 13. It's a long corner, you spend a lot of time in it, and therefore you go through the whole range of the wind coming towards the front of the car, then more to the side of the car, then towards the rear of the car as you exit finally the corner, depending on where the wind's going. And you also get a bit of a swirl effect as well as the other cars circulate the track at that point. It's quite high up. I think it's the highest point of the track. There's not a huge elevation change here. It's around 40 meters, I think, by memory. But yeah, you're at the highest point of the track up there.
As we have a close look at Max Verstappen lap.
Yeah, so here he comes to, well, it's a bit of a mix-up of different corners. So this is 9 and 10. The car tucks in well there. And yeah, once again, just looking at the car, even in the straight line, it's just so nice in its ride control, I'd say. And that really favours the... it goes a long way to benefiting the aero performance of the car, but also for the driver as well. I mean, with pinpoint accuracy, being able to pick your braking point. If the driver's not bouncing around as much as we saw Leclerc's head, it's nothing like it used to be, obviously, in 22 and last season. But it's if you can give the driver a bit more comfort as well, you will unlock more performance from them, not just from the car.
That's got to be the most valuable notebook in the paddock, hasn't it, that notebook? Tucked under Adrian Newey's arm there.
Yeah, what other team would give to
that notebook. I probably wouldn't understand any of it, but I would love to see what's in that notebook. Right, Yuki Tsunoda, that isn't the Sauber team. That is...
Picked up a little bit more light.
Yes, Yuki.
Yeah, so
that
like,
is in fact, yeah, the RB, but it has a lot of flow beers. Sorry, Ant, you were saying.
so like I was saying before, you know, the drivers are so sensitive to that wind change, that direction change. Actually, this circuit's brilliant because you've got the big tower before turn one, and there's a huge flag, Bahraini flag, that flies in the wind, and you can see before you even go out, you just look at that and you go, oh yeah, it's changed direction, the wind has changed direction. So it's a good telltale for the drivers just to prepare. You don't even have to ask your engineer which way the wind's going. You can't see it from inside the car, but yeah, before you go out, I'd quite often look at that and go, all right, yeah, so the wind's picking up and it's changed direction. That means if the flag is, you know, giving me a tailwind now towards turn one, I know I'm going to have to brake a bit earlier. And,
This is one of the... Sorry, go on.
no, it's just, you know, you have to have a plan before you get into the car. You don't just drive through the seat of your pants all the time. And that's why Yuki's asking his engineer, right, that, you know, wind's picked up, yeah, so I'm going to have to change my style a bit, learn where to brake a bit earlier or later for different corners and what that's going to do to the balance of the car.
I literally wrote down at 11:10, winds headwind into turn one, and within an hour and a half, or just over an hour and a half, that's changed into more of a crosswind across there. But this is one of those tracks, Ant, as I was saying, you actually can see the flags pointing in one direction at one end and in a different direction at the other end, which is not helpful, at the end of a straight, which is not helpful.
There is that flag.
There is that flag.
Sits on top of